So I use Google Docs to type up my notes for everything, right? And I speak when I'm typing up my notes because it's just easier for me to narrate.
Right.
Things, right? Every time I said porn or Pornhub, it would write P asterisk asterisk asterisk. Like, so I'm getting censored by technology for even like preparing to talk to you about
Oh
some of
yeah.
your work.
I
Like,
I cannot even tell you how many times my like important emails between colleagues and me have been caught by spam filters. I almost missed, like, we had this, like, multi-$100,000 longitudinal survey project that we've been working on for a few years, and we almost missed getting a wave out on time because my emails to the company running the surveys were getting screened to their spam filters because the attachments all had the word porn all up in there. So.
oh God. Thanks whitelisting.
Yes, it's great.
All right, but I mean, like, I think that's just a really interesting kind of view, because if even the technology is censoring your ability to communicate about your research, what is it like doing your research in a world that kind of, stands back from it?
I always have talked about this anecdote. So I've been interested in studying this stuff since I was an undergraduate, but one of the first papers I ever tried to publish and was on the notion of people feeling addicted to pornography. And a reviewer, I mean, the paper got rejected, and one of the reviewers told me, you might as well be studying alien abductions or self-perceived alien abductions. It's just as real as this notion of out-of-control pornography use. And I remember feeling like, wait, so you're telling me what I'm interested in is completely worthless and the field doesn't care about it. And so, I mean, that was shaping, and what I mean by shaping is that I'm a chip on the shoulder type of person. Like that's always been motivating for me. When I played sports, that was motivating.
Right.
So from the get-go, from like second year of grad school, I recall feeling like no one thought this was a serious or a real topic that psychologists should be interested in. And now so there's that from the field where there's like, well, no, psychologists don't do the porn research. And then there's the general public society part that, like, if you care about porn research, it's because you have a very strong opinion one way or the other. It's not, you don't have, the thought of, well, porn might be good, it might be bad, let's study it. If you're in the public and you care about porn research, it's either because you think porn is the worst thing ever, and it's turning us all into sex-crazed, computer addicted, I don't know, like zombies or rapists, I don't know, something in that genre, or it's because you think porn is, the best, and we should all be watching more porn.
Right.
And there's nobody in the middle, and so there's just saying, I'm a scientist trying to understand it. There's just not a whole lot of room for that.
What are you saying, that you're trying to investigate a phenomenon as it exists instead of like bringing your biases into it beforehand? Come on.
Exactly. So this idea of like, I love nuance. Nuance is good, and as it turns out, the world hates nuance.
Right. So. Well, I've actually been thinking about, like, because I am going to be putting this up on YouTube and everything. It's like, how do I, like, what terms do I put in that don't make it so it just like automatically gets shunted one way or the other, But that, what you just mentioned about your advisor, about people reviewing your work and saying that, it's like alien abductions. Well, that's by the way, that's great.
Which, by the way, this is an aside. I actually think alien abduction research would be super cool and interesting, and people should do more of that. Right? But like, that's a separate.
Well, no, I mean, like, I think it's a smart thing to say, though, right? Because, like, all right, let's just suspend disbelief for a second in alien abduction, right? Like, I do not necessarily, I don't believe in alien abduction, right? I think that there's a lot of other plausible ways to describe what people describe as alien abduction. And I grew up in Arizona with that fire in the sky thing, right? Like that shit's all in the local culture. But people still believe it happens, right? And understanding that phenomenon could be very useful in a number of ways, right? But in order to understand that phenomenon, you have to walk into it not thinking that people are idiots immediately.
Yes.
Which, yeah. So, all right. Well, it's not an aside. I think it's actually amazingly germane to the rest of what's going on. And I'm going to be referencing your current directions article, which will be linked somewhere below. But I wanted to ask you one thing that occurred to me while looking at that article. You said in there, very astutely, not a lot of research is being done on sexual media consumption, on porn consumption, right? I think that's true at an academic level. Have you ever considered what it's being done at like an industrial level, like with MindGeek?
I mean, yeah. So I don't believe there's a single tech company out there that's not doing some level of basic psychological research, even if they don't call it that.
Right.
So yeah, MindGeek undoubtedly has. I mean, you see it in Pornhub analytics. So if you follow anything related to porn research, or frankly, probably if you just follow porn industry as well, every year Pornhub puts out a very safe for work summary of all of their, use habits and patterns of use and topics. And they clearly have some very data minded folks working there. I mean, I recall they put out a report when there was the fake incoming nuclear warning in Hawaii. I don't know, like there was the accident with their nuclear warning system, right? For like a few years ago. They had an analysis within the next few days of the porn use habits in response to that. So they clearly have a smart data management team that's doing research. Now, I would argue that they probably don't have the same goals with their research.
Sure.
I mean, industry is just inherently motivated differently. But they do the research.
Have you ever just for kicks, have you ever reached out to them and said, hey, got any of that there data that you want to send out?
I have not. I know researchers who have. And part of the reason I haven't, and this is for better or for worse, there's a lot of controversy in the porn research field. And so I have more than once had activists try to contact my university and get me, I don't know if they're trying to get me to lose my job. They've contacted other academics asking them to condemn my research. They've contacted my IRB to try to show that my research was somehow unethical. They've contacted journals to try to retract my articles. So there's these activists out there that really, and they're anti-pornography activists. So on the one hand, I do my research and I try to ignore them. On the other hand, directly partnering with the industry might not be the most strategic move for my public branding kind of thing. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed to them collecting data and even I cite the Pornhub statistics all the time. So that's one half of it. The other half of it is the researchers I know that have reached out to them, Pornhub, or the MindGeek conglomerate, if you will.
Right.
They're very.
Can you just? I know we've used MindGeek a few times. Yeah. I know I've done my due diligence. Can you just explain what MindGeek is, real quick?
So MindGeek is a large tech company that manages, hosts, and has developed a number of websites. The vast majority of which are pornography websites. So they own and run Pornhub.com, but they also own some of the porn studios that actually produce porn. So Pornhub is a tube website that just hosts videos that are pornographic. Videos, I guess, probably images and stuff like that too, but it's more or less, the YouTube of porn. And that is one of the websites that MindGeek owns, but they own actually dozens, if not hundreds of other ones. They own competitors for Pornhub. Like it's all very big tech. And so people often think of like these shady, seedy porn websites when the reality is they're managed and run by tech companies that rival, super well-known tech companies that everyone's familiar with. Right. So that's who MindGeek is, and they are possessive of their data.
Right.
It's industry, and so you're familiar, obviously, with working with industry, and I know a lot of industry, like IO psychologists in my department and in the world, and anytime you're working with industry, proprietary data is a big deal, and it's hard to get around sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like that's really frustrating for me. And I imagine it, like, maybe I'm projecting a little bit here, but is it frustrating for you? Because I feel like being able to be so close to the source material can give such great insight so much more rapidly than the way that you have to collect data otherwise.
Oh yeah. And I agree. I mean, this is actually a perpetual issue that we come up with in tech research and screen time research is that when you ask someone how much time are they spending doing X tech activity, this activity that, I've got my phone, like how much time do I spend looking at my phone a day? If you ask them how much time they spend looking at their phone a day or how much time they spend on an app a day, and then you just get them to submit their screen time app statistics, they're different. I mean, like they correlate at like 0.2 or 0.3, which is a fancy way of saying they really don't overlap nearly as much as you would think.
Right.
Well, we don't have that for porn, right? There's multiple reasons. One, there's not like a porn app that we could get people to submit stats from. Two, people are more dodgy about that. And then, so partnering with, or if they made the public data available where you could link someone's, online activity, like this IP address viewed this many hours of porn, and then we also sent a survey to the person and we got these variables, and we could actually correlate with actual porn use. Like that would be super helpful. Like source material would be helpful, but it's just, I don't know of any companies right now that are willing to do that. And then, there's very few psychologists that have the knowledge of how to kind of manage that kind of data as well, that are interested in the topic.
Right. So, academia can be very kind of insular in a lot of ways. And when I did psych and law, when I was in graduate school, right? And after a couple of years, you start figuring out okay, yeah, it's like these 50 people and then maybe these 200 people for like broader topics. Like how many people are serious about the stuff that you're researching right now? Like, do you have like a secret society? Like, I don't see you having like an APA division anytime soon.
Right. No, we don't have an APA division. There are friendly audiences in some networks. So researchers that I would say in psychology that but do a large portion of porn research. There's probably, I could come up with in the States, probably less than 20 people total.
Wow.
And then in Europe, it would be probably similar numbers. But if we extend it to people that do sexual science more broadly, there's several societies for sexual science that have interest groups that look at this kind of stuff. And then in the behavioral addiction research realm, there's some societies where people are interested in compulsive sexual behavior, and some of them are interested in compulsive pornography use as well. So it could be extended out, but it's not the same. When I go to APA, I've given conferences. There'll be 20,000 psychologists in town to attend at APA, and maybe 1,000 of them are giving presentations of some sort. And I've done, every year I've been there, I've been the only symposium or presentation group that's been about pornography use.
So wow.
Now, granted, we always have great attendance because people are interested, but as far as producing the knowledge, there's just not that many in APA. We've done the same at APS, which is the Association for Psychological Science, which is much more academic focused. But I've been there a few times, and every time we've done presentations on porn or compulsive sexual behavior, our presentation has been the only one that even remotely taps into that topic.
Wow. And you said that you get activists who are trying to call your IRB and your institution in the journals, right? Have you ever gotten any feedback from like the academic community? Like, is it still like what you were being told? You're like, no, this is all alien abduction.
No.
Like, is there?
So it's shifted, right? And so that has changed over the past 10 years. There is increasing interest in it. So back in 2015, I published the first paper on pornography use that was ever published in the APA's addiction journal, which is Psychology of Addictive Behavior. So among the APA journals, it is the only one, it is the flagship one devoted to the psychology of addiction. And so in 2015, I had the first paper ever published on porn addiction or porn use in that journal. They've published at least half a dozen articles on it since then. And we've done this. I had the first one ever published on porn use in the big journal Addiction, which is in addiction medicine, addiction psychiatry. Like that was 2017, 18. We had published a paper. They've had several since then. And that pattern has followed. So we've been able to open doors, and there is increasing interest in it. And I think part of that evidence is that current directions piece that you referenced, that we got sent an invitation from the editor of Current Directions saying, hey, this porn research stuff seems to be really taking off. It seems to be important. Why don't you submit something just kind of summarizing it all? And so there have been other cool milestones, but like getting that as an invited piece, I was like, okay, so things are different now. People actually care. People want the good science. That's good. I like this.
That's legit. I'm really happy for that. Like, not just because, like, you know, it's a kind of a scintillating and kind of perhaps edgy topic, and I will fully cop to knowing to being the kind of guy who's like, yeah, that looks cool. But like you brought up some really interesting things actually in that article, and I wanted to explore them just a little bit. Actually, one thing that I saw was I think figure 1, the potential positive and negative effects, right? I think a lot of people are able to think of negative effects of porn because we hear about it all the time.
Yeah.
Like, what do you see as negative effects, but also what do you see as positive effects of doing this kind of research? Like, you know, make your case for like why it should be done, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Why the research should be done?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the argument for why the research should be done, I think, is pretty straightforward. We know from various statistics in developed nations, you should expect on a monthly basis at least half of adult men and somewhere between like an eighth to a quarter of adult women are intentionally viewing pornography in a given month.
Okay.
So this is an activity that half of adult men, that many adult women, a huge subset of your population is engaging in this behavior regularly. We have hundreds of articles on how to have tough political conversations. The reality is most people aren't having tough political conversations. It's just the loud ones on the internet are.
Right.
More people are viewing porn.
Right.
And so like, this is, so it's like this, I mean, and I hate to be cliche, but if everybody's doing it, we should at least understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have all of these articles about video game playing, and video game playing is a very big deal, but I would love, I can't cite the statistics for who all is playing video games off the top of my head, but like, I would argue there's probably just as many people viewing pornography on a regular basis as there are playing video games, but yet we have hundreds and hundreds of articles on video gaming and less on pornography. So it's common. And I mean, the second argument for why we should do it is that it's not like people are magically just discovering it when they're 18 years old. So it's happened. People are discovering it during developmental phases. We are concerned about what YouTube and TikTok videos our kids are watching. We should also be thoughtful about what, you know, pornography videos they're watching. And I don't mean that from like a panic perspective. I mean, literally, we should just understand it. Like, this is something to be understood.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think that those are the big arguments for it. I mean, the final piece that I think matters is, you know, anytime we see fundamental shifts in how basic rewards are met, I mean, basic drives are rewarded. That's what I was looking for. Basic drives are rewarded. We should understand. I mean, we study the effects of hyperpalatable foods and like, you know, super sweet, salt, fatty foods, how those affect appetite and desire. We should probably also be studying how hyperpalatable sexual drives are being met as well. So, you know, I think there's something to be said that this might be shifting a little bit of how we approach sexuality, and we just need to study it better.
Well, and I think do you think, well, again, not trying to project here, do you think that might be the kind of positive response towards your research and other people who are doing sexual science is because it seems like, at least to me, sexuality and discussion about it has been coming more and more to the fore across the past few years. Do you see any kind of correlation between those things, or is this just illusory, or what do you think?
No, I definitely would say, I mean, sexual science has a rich history, and it's got this rich history oftentimes of being the stigmatized field that actually does stuff that matters. And so one of the great examples of this is that, you know, it was a lot of, I mean, public health research had a lot to do with this too, but sex science researchers were very much involved in really getting a firm grasp in understanding the HIV and AIDS epidemic. I mean, decades ago, you know, these were people that were willing to study stigmatized populations engaging in stigmatized behaviors and actually develop effective interventions around condom use and safe sex practices and all of these type of things. So sexual science has this rich history of doing really cool things, but they've always been operating kind of in the stigmatized realm. I think they have become more mainstream in recent years. I think that there's increasing recognition societally of the importance of understanding things like sexuality. And part of that's, I think, just more progressive ideals around sexuality in general. I think part of it is I mean, as methods have gotten more rigorous and as these scientists have upped their game too. So they're just doing cool stuff and they're doing cool interventions. And I think there's something to be said for something to be learned on a public health perspective, bringing something like the AIDS epidemic under control in the States is one of the greatest public health successes we've had as a nation. And right now, I think as a nation, we're very interested in how we can use public health initiatives to manage pandemics and epidemics and things like that. So,
man, yeah, and that's something that I'm glad that you bring that up, because I have seen a lot of people, at least on kind of social science Twitter, taking a very conservative stance towards using science to build interventions that can help with the pandemic, right? And I'm not saying this to judge them in any way. I think there's a lot of great arguments for why we shouldn't be. But as someone who's worked in industry and has been kind of an applied psychologist, I'm like, no, this is exactly why you do research. You get it going here so you can do more in the world. And I'm betting that sexual science has a lot more to give just than like safer sex practices and like condom interventions, right? Like this may be asking you to like dream a little bit, but like what other things can you see kind of growing out of this research the more seriously it's taken?
Right. Well, I mean, so the porn research in particular, I think one of the things that I'm really fascinated in is essentially better conversations around sex education more broadly. So like this is actually part of it for me. And so this sounds like kind of taking a left turn, but we know that we live in a society that does not value, well, it's not society. Very powerful forces within our society are actively against evidence-based sexual education. Now, the flip side of this means that if you don't get evidence-based sexual education, if you teach abstinence only, if you teach, save yourself for marriage and all of these other ideas, and try to scare people out of getting pregnant and STDs, you see that it doesn't work, right? So these people are getting sex education elsewhere. Where are they getting it? There's compelling evidence that young adults and adolescents and even children in some cases are getting their sex education from the internet. So one of the things that I hope people will start to have a serious conversation about is not like, oh, how do we ban porn so they aren't educated on the internet, but more of how do we actually develop a healthier, stronger, more robust sexual education network in the country? Because the solution to, children having access to porn, yes, sure, we should find ways to limit access, especially to a lot of the content that's out there. Sure, that can be an admirable goal, but more importantly, we need to equip people how to understand and how to learn ethical approaches to sexuality from in even what they're seeing. So essentially, how do they become informed consumers, and how do they know when to say, no, I shouldn't look at this, or no, I shouldn't be involved with that? And I think sex education is key. So that's one of the big things that I think about it. I mean, the other things are some more serious conversations about how, and so this is going a very different direction. I think my research in particular is interested in us having more serious conversations about how our morality is leading us to interpret or pathologize or freak out about our behaviors. And like, that's my passion. That's the direction that I want my research to go. The other stuff's important, but this is where I want my program to go. So,
man, all right, yeah. So let's talk about morality a little bit here, because you definitely, like, it almost felt like a footnote, but you talked about what was it? Moral incongruence, right?
Yeah.
People who have a moral objection to porn but still view it anyway, and what the potential outcomes there are. And I will throw in one historical note as well, and correct me, because you've got a much better clinical background than I do, but I believe it was the DSM-3, right, that still had pathologized homosexuality.
Yeah, it wasn't, right? Yeah.
So, within the last, that was what, 40-ish years ago?
30, 35 years ago.
Yeah. So within the lifetime of a lot of people who are listening to this right now, homosexuality was actually classified as a disorder in, kind of like the Bible of clinical diagnoses, right? Now it's not there anymore. But this moralizing component had a big reason as to why homosexuality was there before. Let's talk about morality today, though, right?
Right.
Like why is that so important for you? And why is that so important for like where this research needs to go?
So, I mean, first and foremost, the bias here is that like this is the majority of my program of research. So this current directions piece is about pornography science more broadly. But if you had to peg me as an expert in something, I would say that I'm an expert in the interplay of morality and self-perception and pornography use, like that piece. So this is what I've done the most kind of writing about, the most work about. And so, I mean, it matters for a lot of reasons. So, I'm trained in addiction psychology more broadly. I've treated compulsive gambling or gambling disorder. I've treated substance use disorders. I've treated a lot of things. I'm trained in something called motivational interviewing, which is actually an entire kind of therapeutic approach that's really built towards helping people embrace change. And something we often encounter in addiction is that people don't want to admit that they have a problem. Now, there's a lot of people that do admit they have a problem, and that's a impetus for change. But a lot of times, the classic situation with addiction, I've got it under control. I could quit if I want to. I could just put these down and be done. I could stop smoking at any time. I could stop drinking at any time. So there's this, kind of cliche almost piece of like people saying I'm not an addict or I'm not addicted, even though they are, right?
Right.
Well, in porn research and compulsive sexual behavior more generally, but especially with porn, there's this popular notion of people are addicted to porn. Like, porn is addictive. I'm addicted to porn. Like people will volunteer that they are addicted to porn, even though there's no diagnosis in any manual of porn addiction, right? And so I early on got very fascinated in this idea. Why would you say you're addicted to this? And my guess early on was that there was religious and moral based concerns about it. And essentially, we know in the US at least, and it's not just the US, but in the US at least, right, that Christian groups tend to think porn is bad, Right. So the Catholic Church does not like the porn. Evangelicals do not like the porn. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, they do not like the porn. Porn is bad.
Right.
Porn is bad, and it's taking over, and people are using it, and they're having trouble not using it. Therefore, they're addicted. And I remember hearing these messages. I grew up extremely religious. I remember hearing these messages and thinking, like, something's not clicking. Like, why? I remember one thing hearing somewhere that half of all Christian men in the U.S. were addicted to porn, and thinking like that's literally impossible because Christians make up 70% of the U.S. population. And so half of Christian men would be like, 1/4 of that, which is like 18%. So you're saying 18% of all men in the U.S. No, 18% of the entire U.S. population is addicted to porn. That doesn't make sense, right? That number is too big. And so we just started studying it, and what we find is consistently the best predictor in the U.S. at least of whether or not someone says they're addicted to porn is this interaction between their use and their moral disapproval. And what I mean by that is if you use regularly, but you don't think porn is morally wrong, you probably don't think you're addicted. But if you use even infrequently, like once a month or once a week or less, right? Once a month-ish, and you think porn is bad, porn is morally wrong, chances are you're more likely to say you're addicted. Because using it when you think it's morally wrong seems to leave you feeling pretty bad and more likely to self-diagnose as being addicted to porn.
To kind of reduce the dissonance then, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, I want to be very clear. This is not to say that some people don't develop real problems. Like there are people, I have treated people. It's like, oh, I'm spending 6 hours a day viewing porn. I got fired from my job for viewing porn on my phone at the cash register. Okay. Yes. Clearly there's a problem here that needs to be treated.
Right.
But that's not, every mega church that in the country has groups now for treating porn addiction. And almost all Christian counseling agencies that I know of specialize in treating porn addiction. There's this cottage industry around porn treatment and that's not necessarily matching the science, if you will.
And let's be clear, right? Like when you're saying that mega churches have these this kind of cottage industry going on, it's not with licensed clinical psychologists. It's not with anyone that has any sort of insight into the stuff, right? It's very kind of pastoral therapy. It's very religiously based.
Yeah, I mean, now don't get me wrong. There are licensed therapists that do treat this stuff or claim to treat this stuff, and that's a whole separate. But when I say every megachurch, no, they're not bringing in and paying people for it. And unfortunately, most of these groups of megachurches aren't exploiting people financially for the group itself. I mean, there's other aspects of megachurches maybe that are exploiting people financially, but typically they are support group. They're lay led. There's pastoral led. So it's not. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not like the residential drug treatment industry that's completely based on charging you $50,000 to go sit on a beach somewhere or something.
Right. So, okay. So let's say that you could magically wave your wand and get a study funded like right now that's looking at this kind of interaction, right? Yeah. Like, there we go. Yeah. The interaction between morality and porn use. Like what would be the question that you would just like, beeline towards?
I think the real question that I would beeline towards is I would want to do what's called an ecological momentary assessment study, which is a fancy way, a cell phone study where we would text people a bunch and ask them, have you viewed porn today? I would want to study people that are that are seeking help for their porn addiction. And I'd want a multi-group design. I'd want people that are seeking help via licensed counselors versus those that are seeking help via church related groups, via those that are just seeking to do it on their own. Like that would be who I would want, and measuring these people over the course of a month and their daily mood and porn use habits and things like that. So the question would be, among those that are seeking treatment, is there a difference between the person that's going to a therapist to seek help with their porn use versus the person who's going to their pastor for it? And what is that difference? And I mean, there's probably 15 different differences to look at, but my guess is that there are some huge things going on there. The difference between the person that goes in to seek actual mental help versus the person that's convinced they have an addiction but is talking to their pastor about it. I think that there's something else going on there, and I think that the trajectory looks quite different as well.
And this is just like kind of riffing off of that idea. The people who are going to see their pastor, do you think that that's like, I can see a chicken or egg problem there too, right? Because like maybe you hear, like maybe you go to a sermon and there's something about the evils of the flesh, and people overly quote Leviticus or something, I don't know, but like, and then someone sit there listening, thinks, man, maybe I should go and talk to, somebody about my addiction because I've got this problem. Right. I could see that. I mean, I've lived that experience before, like when I was young and religious and, very Christian conservative, but like, it feels like that would have what you're proposing would have a lot of stunning implications for a lot of people in their personal and spiritual trajectory.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of the reason that I want to do it. As I just fundamentally, so I'm in this weird space of both thinking that problematic pornography use, compulsive sexual behavior is the fancy word that we use in psychology for it. I think it's a real thing that we need to actually understand. And that this moral incongruence piece of this, people that feel really bad about violating their morals also are having a real problem, but it's a different one. And we need to be able to split these out, because when they're getting all mixed together in public surveys and possibly even in seeking help, you don't understand either group well enough. So like, the stunning implication that I would hope would be that, for one, that religious leaders would stop talking about porn addiction and start just talking about maybe living consistent with your values, which is, we can debate whether or not religious leaders should tell you not to view porn. They're never going to stop saying that. But if they frame it in terms of our values as a faith say we shouldn't do this, right, and we're going to try to live up to that, instead of saying, stay away from porn, it's going to ruin your brain and make you an addict. Stop the fear mongering. Like that would be one implication. And then it would also hopefully then start to open doors for people to struggle with behaviors they want to change without feeling like they're fundamentally broken, or like that they're sick, or that they're mentally ill. And I think that matters, because I've seen people in therapy that were convinced they had a porn addiction that did not have an addiction, but it was based in religious-based shame. And if they had just been told years before, hey, this is something that that we think you shouldn't do as much,
Mhm.
But it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It's just something that as part of our faith, we think it's important that you work on. That's not going to have the same negative effects as spending 10 years thinking they're a porn addict, right? Like
Right.
that's just, I mean, it's
Right.
just not good for you to be
Right.
convinced that you're I mean, it's dangerous, I think, for psychological well-being, some of the messages that they're getting in these religious areas.
Well, and I mean, kind of practical implications of that also, right? Like if you're being told, whether it's directly by someone that you're looking to as like a spiritual advisor, or by that like voice in the back of your head that what you're doing is terrible and that you're an addict and that you're broken, right? That makes you a lot less likely to just talk about that, generally speaking, right? Which means that you can increase risk-taking behavior. It means that you can increase the costs that you're willing to endure to participate in. Like there's a lot of stuff there that could be good, not only for understanding porn, but also for understanding kind of, and maybe this is like the secret kind of like, back door into all this, like, but understanding religious faith in a lot of important ways.
Well, that's fair. Yeah. I mean, I think that the implications certainly do extend beyond just porn use itself. And I mean, I mean, there's a bigger conversation to be had around how religious communities are talking about anything. I mean, like religion inherently, and we can talk about this. I don't mean this in the political sense. I mean this in more of a cultural sense, but religion is inherently a conservative force in culture, where as culture changes, religion is going to almost always take the role of reacting against that and trying to hold the line at some previous point. That's the nature of religion. And so porn is just one example of how in the 1960s, yes, dirty magazines existed. Even in the 1970s and 80s, but most religious groups weren't obsessed with it. Well, the internet has changed access, so that's for sure part of it. But religious communities have seen this change and have reacted very strongly to it. I mean, if you went to religious leaders now and said, what is the biggest issue facing the church now? They'd have all sorts of things. But if you said, what about what's the biggest issue facing the religious men in your community? You would not get more than 2 answers before you got to porn. Because they consider it that big of a deal. But this is the role of religion, is to react against changing cultural trends.
Right.
And so I think that porn is just one example of that. You see this with marriage equality. You see this with, abortion and reproductive rights. All of these kind of things, religions groups react to change, typically in a hostile way. But I think there's something to be said for learning how to understand why they're reacting the way that they are.
Right. And that to kind of bring it back to what we were talking about before, is coming in, trying to understand the phenomena as they are, not as we're trying to prejudge them through a particular moral lens. Right.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, this is enduring frustration, having grown up conservative in the South, religious, super religious. I was homeschooled in a religious curriculum. I went to a religious university for undergrad. And I did my PhD and I studied the psychology of religion. I still do a fair bit in that realm. And there's often this rush to judge these religious people, these morally conservative people nationwide, and I mean, even globally, as somehow being primitive in their thinking. And it's not necessarily that. Like, it's just that it's a very different way of relating to the world around you than most of us academic, highly educated types relate to it. And so it's not to say it's good. It's not to say that it's bad, though. It's different. And there's value in understanding without judgment.